Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in a woman's life when being single is no longer a sentence of loneliness, but a season of divine shaping. A long season of standing alone does not mean she has been abandoned. It means she has been chosen for a deeper kind of preparation. A woman who walks alone for years learns the kind of strength that cannot be borrowed, the kind of wisdom that cannot be taught, and the kind of self-respect that cannot be shaken. Her solitude becomes her sanctuary, her silence becomes her teacher, and her journey becomes her testimony. She discovers who she is without applause, without validation, without someone else defining her worth. And in that sacred quiet, she becomes a woman the world cannot break, intimidate, or distract. She becomes a woman who knows her own soul, her own calling, her own rhythm. And when she finally steps forward, she steps forward with the weight of her truth and the grace of her becoming a woman who has been single for a long time, learns to build her life on her own strength, not on the borrowed confidence of others. She does not grow this strength overnight, nor does she choose it because it is glamorous or easy. She grows it because life demands it from her, because her experiences carve it into her bones, because her spirit refuses to collapse under pressure. She learns to rise on mornings when no one wakes her with gentle words, to comfort herself on nights when silence feels heavy, to encourage her own dreams when no one else sees them, to put her feet on the ground even when her heart feels tired. This kind of woman learns that she is her own foundation, her own voice, her own motivation. She learns to become the hero she once expected someone else to be for her. A long season of singleness teaches her to sit with herself, and that alone is a form of courage. Many run from themselves, escaping through relationships that distract, comfort, or shield them from truth. But a woman who is single for a long time must face her own thoughts, her own wounds, her own desires, her own mistakes. She must learn to heal what she cannot blame on someone else, to acknowledge her own patterns, to confront the parts of herself that need refining. This is the kind of self-awareness that makes her powerful beyond measure, because she does not fear her own reflection. She knows who she is, not because someone told her, but because she has spent years witnessing the evolution of her own soul. There is a strength that grows in solitude, a strength that cannot be gifted by companionship. When a woman walks alone, she learns to depend on her own 2 feet. She learns that she can pay her own bills, make her own decisions, solve her own problems, guide her own future. She becomes familiar with the sound of her own voice, giving herself direction. She discovers the fullness of her independence, and this independence becomes a quiet anthem inside her spirit. It does not harden her, but it grounds her. It does not isolate her, but it stabilizes her. She becomes a woman who does not need to cling, beg, or settle, because she has already built a life that stands strong with or without anyone else. People look at her and see confidence, but they do not see the history behind it. They do not see the nights she encouraged herself to keep going. They do not see the battles she fought in private. They do not see the heartbreak she carried quietly. They do not see how many times she doubted herself but rose anyway. They only see the glow that emerges when a woman has walked through the fire alone and learned she could still rise. A woman who has survived solitude becomes a woman who carries resilience in her posture and determination in her eyes. She becomes the kind of woman who does not collapse when life changes, who does not crumble when challenges come, who does not surrender when storms rise. She has already learned that she can endure and still stand tall over time. She stops looking for someone to complete her because she has already completed herself. Not perfectly, not without flaws, not without struggles, but with wholeness that does not depend on external validation. She builds routines that feed her soul. She creates spaces that reflect her spirit. She cultivates a life that mirrors her values. She becomes selective with her time, careful with her energy, intentional with her choices. She no longer accepts anything that disrupts her peace or diminishes her worth. She has lived too long relying on her own strength to let anyone weaken it. She has carried herself through too many storms to let anyone bring unnecessary chaos. She has been her own support system for too long to accept relationships built on imbalance or inconsistency. A woman who has walked alone understands the sacredness of her peace. Peace becomes her treasure. Peace becomes her anchor. Peace becomes her priority. She learns that quiet does not mean emptiness. Quiet becomes the place where she hears her own voice clearly, where she recognizes the whispers of intuition, where she feels God guiding her gently. Her solitude becomes holy ground, not because she is hiding from the world, but because she has finally learned to hear herself without distraction. And once a woman hears her own soul clearly, she is never again confused about what she deserves when others see her being single for years. They may wonder whether she is lonely, but she knows she is simply becoming. Loneliness is the absence of connection, but solitude is the presence of growth. Loneliness weakens a person, but solitude builds them. Loneliness waits for someone else to arrive, but solitude strengthens the woman who must stand alone. She learns the difference because she has lived the difference. She understands that she is not waiting for someone to save her life. She is preparing to build a life so full that anyone who enters it must come with intention, respect, and maturity. This long journey of singleness also teaches about boundaries. Before, she may have allowed too much, tolerated too much, accepted too much, but as she spends time alone, she learns to recognize what she truly needs. She learns to say no without guilt. She learns to say yes without fear. She learns to protect her heart not with walls but with wisdom. She learns that boundaries are not signs of coldness but signs of self-respect. She learns that saying no to the wrong person is one of the most powerful ways to say yes to her future. She discovers that her time is valuable, her energy is sacred, and her spirit is not a place for anyone to trample on. A woman who has walked through long seasons alone becomes emotionally intelligent in ways others may not understand. She becomes patient with herself. She becomes her own cheerleader, her own nurturer, her own protector. She learns to manage her emotions without leaning on someone else to regulate them. She knows how to sit with sadness without drowning in it, how to sit with hope without depending on it, how to sit with uncertainty without panicking. She learns to breathe through disappointment, to learn from pain, to rise from confusion. Her emotional muscles become strong, flexible, and wise. Her inner strength does not make her unlovable, it makes her unforgettable. It does not make her intimidating, it makes her deeply aware of her value. It does not make her unapproachable, it makes her unwilling to compromise her soul. She becomes the kind of woman who does not chase, pressure, or beg for love. She understands that genuine love must match the stability she has built. She knows that any relationship worth having must enhance her life, not drain it. She knows that partnership is not about filling emptiness, but about sharing fullness. And she refuses to shrink herself for someone who cannot appreciate the journey she walked alone. The beauty of a woman who has been single for a long time is that she becomes grounded in authenticity. She stops pretending to be who others want. She stops adjusting herself to fit someone else's expectations. She stops bending herself into shapes that make her uncomfortable. She becomes real, honest, raw, whole. She honors her truth without apology. She expresses her desires without fear. She stands in her identity without seeking approval. She wears her scars with pride because she knows they tell the story of a woman who survived everything meant to break her. As she continues walking her path, she realizes that singleness is not a problem but a process. It is not a punishment but preparation. It is not an emptiness but an education. It is the season where she learns what she wants, but more importantly, who she is. She learns that her dreams are valid, her standards are important, her life is meaningful. She discovers passions she never knew she had, talents she never explored, strengths she never celebrated. She builds friendships that nourish her, routines that stabilize her, goals that inspire her. She becomes a woman who knows how to create a life worth living, regardless of who comes or goes, and in this long season of independence, she also learns gratitude. Gratitude for the days she carried herself. Gratitude for the nights she wiped her own tears. Gratitude for the mornings she rose even when she felt heavy. Gratitude for the wisdom she gained through endurance. Gratitude for the clarity that came with silence. Gratitude for the woman she has become through it all. She realizes that she is not strong because she never fell. She is strong because she always found a way to rise again. She becomes grateful not just for the blessings, but for the lessons, not just for the joys, but for the challenges that shaped her. A woman who has been single for a long time becomes a woman who finally understands that she is whole, capable, powerful, and deserving. And she does not build this understanding through romance, but through resilience. She does not build it through validation, but through inner truth. She does not build it through another person's love, but through her own unwavering courage to love herself fully. Solitude becomes the training ground where she discovers her voice, her identity, and the boundaries she never had before. A woman who has walked alone for years walks through a quiet world that forces her to listen to the whispers of her own soul. In the beginning, the silence feels unfamiliar, almost too loud, almost too revealing, because solitude has a way of stripping away distractions and placing a mirror in front of her life. She begins this journey thinking she is simply living without companionship, but slowly she realizes she is stepping into the laboratory of her own becoming. She is no longer defined by expectations placed on her, no longer shaped by someone else's desires, no longer molded by the weight of external opinions. Instead, she begins shaping herself with the tools of truth, clarity, and reflection. In solitude, she hears her own voice for the first time in a long time. Not the voice she used to perform for others, not the voice she used to please people, not the voice she used to keep peace at her own expense, but the voice that rises from the depth of her soul. She learns what her heart truly wants, not what she was told she should want. She begins to recognize the difference between loneliness and self-discovery. Loneliness is a hunger for another person, but self-discovery is nourishment from within. The more she sits in solitude, the more she learns how to feed herself emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Her thoughts become clearer, her desires become honest, and her intuition becomes louder. She realizes that her voice was never missing. It was simply buried beneath the noise of life, and solitude gives her the quiet needed to dig it out. With that voice comes identity. Identity that is hers, not shaped by love, loss, or societal pressure. Identity rooted in authenticity instead of fear. Identity formed not by the roles others handed her, but by the truth she uncovers within. A woman who is single for a long time learns who she is when no one is watching, no one is clapping, no one is holding her hand. She learns her likes and dislikes, her rhythm and patterns, her strengths and vulnerabilities. She learns what brings her peace and what drains her energy. She learns what she can live with and what she can no longer tolerate. She begins to understand the difference between who she pretended to be for acceptance and who she truly is in the privacy of her own soul. This identity does not arrive all at once. It arrives in layers. It arrives in moments of self-honesty. It arrives in the quiet spaces of her days when she makes decisions without needing permission, when she chooses her own path without asking for approval. She learns that her identity is not shaped by relationship status, not defined by whether she belongs to someone else, but refined by how deeply she belongs to herself. She begins to realize that she is allowed to rewrite her story at any point. She is allowed to change her mind, shift her standards, and evolve her desires. She learns that she does not have to cling to past versions of herself just because others grew comfortable with them. Solitude gives her the freedom to grow without apology, and as she grows, she begins to build boundaries. Boundaries she never had before. Boundaries she did not know she needed. Boundaries no one taught her. Boundaries that rise from the truth she discovers in her quiet moments. For the first time, she begins to protect her time because she understands its value. She begins to protect her energy because she recognizes its worth. She begins to protect her heart because she has finally learned how precious it is. She stops giving access to people who drain her spirit. She stops allowing behavior that disrespects her soul. She stops entertaining relationships that break her more than they build her. She stops shrinking herself to make others comfortable. She stops saying yes when her heart whispers no. She stops betraying herself for the sake of belonging. Her solitude teaches her that the most dangerous abandonment is not being abandoned by others. It is abandoning herself. As she strengthens these boundaries, she begins to see how much of her past pain came from not having them. She sees how many times she stayed silent when she should have spoken. She sees the moment she allowed disrespect to slide because she feared losing someone. She sees the relationships she accepted because she didn't know she deserved better. She sees the times she poured into people who never poured back. She sees the opportunities she missed because she prioritized others over herself. She sees that her lack of boundaries was not a sign of love, but a sign of longing to be seen, valued, appreciated. And solitude becomes the place where she finally realizes she no longer needs to beg for the very things she can give herself. This understanding transforms her. She begins to walk differently. She begins to speak differently. She begins to carry herself with a level of certainty that cannot be faked. She begins to operate with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows who she is and refuses to return to the woman she used to be. She stops explaining her choices to people who were never meant to guide her journey. She stops apologizing for prioritizing her peace. She stops seeking validation from those who never saw her clearly. She becomes guided by her own standards instead of someone else's opinions. Her solitude turns her into a woman who is not afraid to disappoint others if it means being loyal to herself. Time alone also teaches her patience, not the kind that waits for someone else to choose her, but the kind that waits for her own life to unfold. She learns that she does not have to rush, that she does not have to force connections, that she does not have to cling to timelines created by society. She learns that healing has its own pace, growth has its own rhythm, and transformation has its own timing. She stops comparing her journey to others because she understands that her path is sacred. She realizes that rushing into relationships to avoid being alone creates more wounds than comfort. She learns that the wrong partnership can feel lonelier than walking alone. Her solitude teaches her that it is better to walk by herself than to walk with someone who leads her away from herself. In this quiet season, she becomes emotionally fluent. She learns to understand her feelings instead of denying them. She learns to express her truth instead of suppressing it. She learns to seek peace instead of chaos. She learns that love is not supposed to hurt, confuse, or diminish her. Love is not supposed to make her question her worth or silence her voice. Real love recognizes her identity, respects her boundaries, and supports her growth. She understands that the love she seeks must align with the woman she has become, not the woman she used to be. This realization is the heart of her transformation because it teaches her that she must never lower herself for connection. If a person cannot meet her at her level, she no longer climbs down to meet them. Her solitude becomes a teacher, a healer, a sculptor, shaping her into a woman with emotional depth and spiritual strength. She begins to nurture herself the way she once wished someone else would. She begins to comfort herself in ways she did not know she needed. She begins to forgive herself for mistakes she made when she did not know her value. She learns that she does not need someone else to validate her existence. She learns that she is not hard to love. She was simply giving her love to the wrong places. She learns that she does not have to prove her worth. She only has to honor it. Her solitude becomes the soil where her self-esteem grows roots so deep that no one can uproot them again. And the more she grows, the more she realizes how powerful she truly is. She understands that her voice can shape her future. She understands that her identity can shift her destiny. She understands that her boundaries can safeguard her peace. She understands that solitude is not a weakness but a strength. She understands that she is whole even without companionship. She understands that she is enough even without external affirmation. She understands that she can build a beautiful life centered on truth, clarity, and self-respect. Solitude becomes the place where she learns to breathe without anxiety, to rest without guilt, to dream without limitation, to rise without hesitation. It becomes the space where she grows into a woman who cannot be manipulated by fear, loneliness, or insecurity. She becomes a woman who chooses relationships based on alignment, not desperation. She becomes a woman who welcomes love but does not depend on it for survival. She becomes a woman who walks away from anything that threatens her inner peace. She becomes a woman who understands that being alone is not the absence of love, but the presence of preparation. Being single for a long season teaches her to elevate her standards, protect her peace, and refuse anything that does not honor her spirit. A woman who has walked the road alone for years does not remain the same woman who began that journey. With each passing season, she becomes more aware of what she can accept, what she can no longer tolerate, and what she deserves deep in her soul. Loneliness may whisper to her now and then, but wisdom begins to speak louder, teaching her that companionship without respect is not companionship. Love without stability is not love, and attention without intention is not worth her time. Her long walk alone becomes the sharpening stone that refines her expectations, not because she becomes picky, but because she becomes aware of her value. She realizes her heart is not a place for careless hands. Her mind is not a space for emotional games, and her soul is not a home for inconsistent energy. She begins to look back at her past and sees how often she lowered herself to fit into places she was never meant to stand. She remembers the time she accepted half love because she did not yet understand the fullness she deserved. She remembers the moments she ignored red flags because she hoped someone would change. She remembers the days she poured into people who did not even attempt to refill her spirit. She remembers how much of her peace she sacrificed just to keep someone else comfortable. And as she grows, she realizes that the woman she used to be was not weak. She was uninformed about her own worth. Solitude opens her eyes to the truth that settling is not love, tolerance is not loyalty, and endurance is not partnership. She learns that the love she desires must be rooted in respect, honesty, consistency, and peace, and anything less is too expensive for the price of her spirit. Over time, she begins to feel a shift in her heart. She no longer becomes excited by the attention that once flattered her. She no longer feels impressed by gestures that once felt meaningful. She no longer feels moved by apologies that come without change. Her standards rise not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She understands that her time is precious, her energy is sacred, and her peace is priceless. She begins to choose her connections with intention, not with fear. She begins to value quality far more than company. She begins to understand that the wrong person can disrupt her entire life, but the right person can enhance it without demanding the sacrifice of her joy or identity. She becomes a woman who approaches relationships with the maturity that comes from knowing herself deeply. Her peace becomes her greatest treasure, and she guards it more fiercely than ever before. She has lived long enough without chaos to recognize when someone brings it. She has healed long enough to sense when someone's presence threatens that healing. She has grown long enough to see through empty words and inconsistent behavior. She protects her peace by creating an environment where her heart is safe, her mind is calm, and her soul is free. She stops explaining why she needs space, why she values quiet, why she refuses unnecessary arguments. She no longer seeks approval for choosing herself. She understands that peace is not something she waits for. It is something she creates, something she defends, something she nourishes. And she refuses to allow anyone to disturb the sanctuary she has built within herself. Being single for a long time also reveals to her the importance of emotional alignment. She begins to feel when a connection matches her spirit and when it does not. She becomes sensitive to energy, aware of intentions, discerning of character. She does not ignore her intuition the way she once did. She no longer takes responsibility for fixing broken people or healing wounds she did not cause. She no longer accepts relationships built on confusion, inconsistency, or empty promises. She recognizes that emotional misalignment is not a challenge to overcome. It is a sign to walk away. She learns that love is not supposed to feel like guessing, doubting, or suffering. Love is supposed to feel like clarity, trust, and mutual respect. Her long journey alone teaches her that she deserves a partnership where her spirit is honored, not drained. She stops entertaining relationships that do not align with her future. She no longer engages with people who come with half effort, half love, or half truth. She no longer entertains connections that require her to dim her light or shrink her soul. She stops being impressed by superficial charm because she now seeks emotional presence, spiritual depth, and moral consistency. She stops accepting relationships built on potential and starts valuing relationships built on action. She understands that potential is only a promise, but consistency is proof. She wants someone who does not just say the right things, but lives by them. Someone who does not just admire her strength, but respects her boundaries. Someone who does not just show up for the good moments, but stands steady during the difficult ones. Her elevated standards do not come from arrogance. They come from wisdom. They come from the nights she cried alone. They come from the mornings she rose stronger. They come from the days she chose healing over repeating old cycles. Her standards are not walls. They are filters that protect her from experiences that would undo the woman she has worked so hard to become. She understands now that not everyone deserves access to her heart. Not everyone deserves a seat at her table. Not everyone deserves her loyalty, her softness, her effort. She gives her energy deliberately, not freely. She gives her love carefully, not blindly. She gives her trust gradually, not impulsively. Her standards become the reflection of her growth and the shield of her spirit as she continues walking her path. She notices how differently she responds to life. She used to feel afraid of being alone, but now she understands the strength of standing on her own. She used to fear missing out, but now she sees that the only thing worth missing is anything that steals her peace. She used to chase validation, but now she understands that genuine connection does not require her to prove herself. She becomes a woman who chooses not from desperation, but from discernment. She becomes a woman who no longer asks, "Do they want me?" but instead asks, "Do they respect my spirit?" She becomes a woman who no longer wonders, "Am I enough?" but instead asks, "Are they aligned with the woman I have become?" Her long season of singleness teaches her that relationships should not break her identity but support it. A partner should not silence her voice but encourage it. A connection should not disturb her peace but deepen it. She begins to understand that love should feel like a gentle place to land, not a battlefield to survive. She realizes that the right person will not fear her standards. They will meet them. The right person will not be intimidated by her boundaries. They will honor them. The right person will not ask her to sacrifice her peace, they will protect it alongside her. This understanding transforms the way she allows people into her life. She becomes a woman who sees herself clearly. And because she sees herself clearly, she no longer tolerates relationships that blur her identity. She knows her worth too deeply to engage in situations that dishonor her. She respects her growth too much to allow anyone to pull her backward. She loves herself too fully to accept anything that does not reciprocate what she offers from the heart. Her long journey alone becomes a season of refining her spirit until she becomes a woman who stands firm in her truth, steady in her value, and grounded in her purpose. She realizes that her life is not waiting to begin when someone enters it. Her life is already in motion. Her joy is already blooming. Her peace is already established. Her identity is already solid. Anyone who joins her path must bring something meaningful, something honest, something steady. They must contribute to her growth, not derail it. They must respect her effort, not diminish it. They must honor her spirit, not manipulate it. Her elevated standards become a reflection of her transformation and a declaration of the kind of life she is committed to living. She walks forward with grace, knowing that being single for a long time was not a punishment, but a preparation. It was not a delay, but a development. It was not emptiness, but education. She understands now that the woman she is today was shaped by the choices she made during the quietest seasons of her life. And she refuses to let anyone take her back to a version of herself that she worked so hard to outgrow. A woman who has been single for a long time eventually discovers that her singleness was never a waiting room, but a preparation room, a sacred space where life teaches her the quiet truths she could not have learned in the noise of constant companionship. She realizes that this season was not a punishment placed upon her, but a blessing folded in disguise, a blessing that allowed her to meet herself fully, without distraction, without compromise, without molding herself. For someone else in this long stretch of walking alone, she begins to see that solitude is not empty. It is overflowing with lessons wrapped in stillness. It is a space that sharpens her spirit, expands her mind, and strengthens her emotional spine. She learns that she can carry her own burdens without collapsing, make her own decisions without doubting, and craft her own future without waiting for someone to approve her dreams. And slowly, she starts becoming a woman who is not desperate for presence because she has discovered presence within herself. She understands that preparation is not glamorous. It is not soft, and it is not always easy. Preparation stretches her, pushes her, cleans her, and sometimes breaks her open so she can be rebuilt from the inside. But this rebuilding is divine. It is intentional. It is slow, steady work that transforms her from the woman she once was into the woman she was always meant to be. A woman who has walked through long seasons of singleness has walked through the wilderness of her own heart and come out with treasures she did not know she possessed. She has walked into rooms by herself, traveled roads alone, faced disappointments without support, and still managed to stand. Her steps may have been shaky, but they were hers. Her voice may have trembled, but it was her own. Her fears may have whispered louder than her courage, but she still moved forward. And every step she took alone became a testament to her resilience, her discipline, and her extraordinary ability to survive and rise. This preparation room teaches her to love herself in ways she never attempted before. It teaches her to nourish her own soul, to celebrate her own victories, to comfort her own wounds. She learns how to sit with herself without needing noise to fill the silence. She learns what brings her joy without anyone else telling her what should make her happy. She learns how to honor her emotions instead of hiding them. She learns how to forgive herself for mistakes she made when she did not yet understand her worth. She learns that loving herself is not selfishness but survival, not arrogance but acceptance, not ego but healing. And through this deepening self-love, she transforms into a woman who knows how she deserves to be treated, how she deserves to be spoken to, and how she deserves to be loved. Her standards no longer rise out of pride, they rise out of clarity. In this long season of preparation, she also becomes sensitive to the energy around her. She notices the difference between connection and attachment, between love and attention, between a partner and a distraction. She starts to see through people. She reads intentions like open books. She no longer falls for charm without character, words without consistency, promises without action. She is no longer moved by temporary affection because she has learned to give herself permanent peace. Her solitude has trained her to value alignment over excitement, depth over appearance, and substance over noise. She begins to understand that she is not meant to fit into small spaces or dim her light to make others feel comfortable. She is meant to walk in the fullness of who she is, boldly, gracefully, unapologetically. This preparation room shapes her relationship with time. When a woman has been single for a long time, she stops rushing. She stops panicking. She stops measuring her life by other people's timelines. She begins to trust her own pace, her own journey, and God's divine timing. She no longer feels behind because she realizes she was never behind. She was being prepared. She sees that some blessings cannot arrive until she becomes strong enough to hold them, wise enough to protect them, and healed enough to receive them without fear. She understands that God's delays are not denials but shields, protecting her from relationships that would have broken her, drained her, shrunk her, or distracted her from her purpose. She begins to trust that what is hers will find its way to her without being chased, forced, or begged for. What is meant for her heart will enter her life with clarity, respect, and truth. And in this preparation room, she also learns how to care for her peace as if it were the most precious resource she owns. She stops tolerating things that disturb her spirit. She stops entertaining conversations that drain her confidence. She stops allowing people who carry chaos to sit at her table. She values her peace because she paid for it with long nights of loneliness, tears she did not speak of, battles no one saw, and healing that took years to cultivate. Peace is no longer optional for her. It is her foundation. It is the ground she stands on, the air she breathes, the water she drinks. She refuses anything that threatens it in her preparation. She also confronts her wounds with honesty and courage. She faces the parts of herself she used to run from. She acknowledges the patterns that once sabotaged her happiness. She stops blaming others for what she allowed and begins the slow work of mending what she once ignored. Healing becomes her responsibility, not a burden. She begins to recognize the version of herself that hurt others, tolerated pain, accepted excuses, and settled for less. She thanks that old version for surviving, but she no longer allows it to lead her life. She grows into a woman who moves with intention, humility, strength, and emotional maturity. This maturity becomes a shield that protects her from cycles she once repeated without realizing why. It gives her the courage to walk away from what does not honor her, even when her heart is still attached, and even when her loneliness tells her to stay. She understands that temporary companionship is not worth permanent damage. Her preparation also teaches her to nurture her dreams again. She no longer waits for someone to join her before she builds the life she desires. She starts the business, takes the trip, begins the project, learns the skill, redecorates her home, changes her routine. She stops postponing her joy. She stops putting her aspirations on hold. She stops waiting for permission. She takes her life into her own hands and breathes vision into every corner of her world. Her singleness becomes soil for creativity, ambition, and growth. She becomes a woman who does not fear standing alone because she has built a life so fulfilling that loneliness cannot intimidate her. She creates a world that reflects her soul, her experiences, her resilience, her passions. She grows into a woman who welcomes love but does not depend on it for survival in this season. She also discovers the value of divine alignment. She becomes more spiritually aware, more intuitive, more connected to the quiet whispers of her soul. She learns to listen to God, to trust the nudges in her spirit, to walk away when she feels discomfort she cannot explain, to stay when peace settles around her like a warm blanket. She begins to understand that preparation is not just emotional or physical, it is deeply spiritual. God uses her singleness to shape her faith, strengthen her trust, and refine her purpose. He pulls her away from noise to teach her how to hear Him. He removes distractions so she can see what He has been trying to show her. He keeps her alone so He can prepare her heart for something far greater than what she once hoped for. She realizes that this preparation is divine choreography, every moment placed with intention, and as she grows through all of this, she becomes a woman who is ready not for just any relationship, not for just any attention, but for a love that respects her, a partnership that matches her strength, a connection that aligns with her purpose. Her preparation has taught her that she does not need someone to complete her. She is already whole. She does not seek someone to save her. She has already survived. She does not need someone to validate her. She validates herself by simply existing, standing, breathing, becoming. She wants a love that is inspired by who she is, not dependent on who she sacrifices herself to be. A love that is peaceful, not chaotic. A love that is steady, not inconsistent. A love that is mutual, not one-sided. A love she can grow in, not shrink for. And because she has been prepared, she can now recognize that kind of love when it arrives. This is what the preparation room of long-term singleness creates within her. A woman shaped by solitude, strengthened by independence, guided by intuition, protected by peace, and elevated by purpose. A woman who has learned herself, healed herself, respected herself, and built herself. A woman who no longer enters relationships out of fear, pressure, or loneliness, but out of wholeness, clarity, and truth. A woman who is ready to receive love not because she is incomplete without it, but because she is complete enough to honor it when it finally finds its way to her.